What's up everyone? Today I've got a fun little summertime delight for you. We're doing Romesco pasta topped with blackened pork tenderloin and cilantro chimichurri. Bit of an unusual fusion-y combo, but it was loosely based on something my mom used to make when I was a kid that I loved, so I was pretty sure it was going to work, and let me tell you, it really did. So let's get into it. The first step today is going to be to make the Romesco. This is going to be the most labor-intensive part of the whole thing because you need to prep a lot of different ingredients for Romesco, so just stick with me a little and we'll get there. The first thing I'll get going is some garlic that I'm going to roast. I'm doing a bunch here because it's a nice thing to have on hand, but you don't need to do all of this. One head will be more than enough for this recipe. I'm cutting these down the middle orbitally to expose all the cloves, and then what I like to do is put these cut side up into a muffin tin. Then just a little drizzle of olive oil on each, and I'll wrap this up in tin foil, and then that'll go into a 400-degree Fahrenheit oven for about 30 minutes. While those get going, I'll start prepping some other ingredients. Here I have some ancho chilies that I'm going to start rehydrating with some boiling water. Romesco is traditionally made with what are called Nora peppers, but those can be hard to find, and Serious Eats tells me that anchos are a good substitute, so that's what I'm doing. I'm just using the measuring cup there to make sure everything stays submerged. Alright, now I need some bread. Normally I think you would use stale bread for this, which I don't have, so instead I'll take a big slice of this sourdough here and head over to the poorly lit corner of my kitchen to throw it in a low temperature toaster oven for about 30 minutes. I'm trying to dry this, not toast it, so I have the temperature set to around 225 Fahrenheit. I want to drive off the moisture now so it'll be better equipped to soak up the moisture from the other things in the sauce later. Now, in addition to the anchos, I'm also going to follow the more modern approach and roast a red bell pepper. I do this directly over the flame on my stove, but if you don't have gas, you can also do this under the broiler. After a few minutes of rolling it around to get every side, it should be evenly charred and softened, so that'll go into a covered bowl to steam through. So that's the end of my ingredient prep. Let's jump forward just a bit and start putting this together. I'm going to use about half of one of my garlic bulb halves, so I'll scoop that out and throw it into my food processor. Then I have some tomatoes. These are just a couple canned whole tomatoes, but you can use fresh if you have access to good ones. Then I have my bell pepper that I need to peel. Easiest way I figured out how to do this is to cut it from the top to the bottom on one side, and then trim out the stem, and then try to open the whole thing up as flat as possible. Then I'll get whatever seeds and ribs from the inside out that I can, and then flip this over and use the back of my knife to scrape off the charred skin. If you roasted it long enough, it should all come off pretty easily. I'll chop that into chunks and throw it in, and my bread has dried out sufficiently, so I'll do that next. I'm going to cut the crusts off, but you probably don't need to. Then I'll just get that into cubes and toss it in as well. Next I have some blanched almonds. These ones I toasted really lightly with some olive oil and salt. And now for the last of my prepped ingredients, I've got my rehydrated anchos here. I'm going to open these up and scrape the flesh out from off the skin, kind of similarly to what I did with the bell pepper, but just the other way around. These are really fragile and the process is kind of tedious, so try not to get too frustrated. Once those are all scraped down to the best of my abilities, I'll toss them in the food processor, and then I'll throw in a good pinch of salt, a tablespoon or two of sherry vinegar, and then a couple tablespoons of olive oil. I'm going to blend this for a while and scrape down the inside every once in a while just to make sure everything gets evenly broken down. Once it starts looking relatively smooth, I'll start adding a little bit more olive oil to emulsify in there. I'm adding just a couple tablespoons at a time and then checking the texture after each dose. In the end, I added somewhere between a quarter and a half cup probably. The final texture should be thick and glossy, kind of like this. So once it's there, this Romesco is done. So I'll pack that up for now and move on to my next piece, which will be the chimichurri sauce. For the herbs, I'm going with cilantro and fresh oregano. I'm going to chop those up pretty much as finely as I can reasonably get them, and I'm going for a hand chop version today as opposed to a blender because that would give a more homogeneous, emulsified texture, whereas with this there will be bigger, more distinct flakes of things that will help accentuate the effect of freshness that I'm primarily in this for today. After that, I'll do 1 clove of garlic. First I'll mince this up, and then I'll sprinkle just a little bit of kosher salt on it, and then grind it all up with the side of my knife. After just a few seconds of this, you should be left with a nice paste. Next, we need something spicy. Normally you would use a dried chili flake, but I bought these Calabrian chilies last week, so they're going in everything now. So I'll mince up 3 of those and throw them in. And then finally, we need some acid. You could use lemon or lime juice, but to keep consistent with the Romesco, I'll just use more sherry vinegar, then some salt, and then enough olive oil to turn this into a sauce, maybe about a quarter of a cup. Stir that in, and our chimichurri is ready to go. Alright, with my sauces done, it's time to start putting this thing together. I have some salted water on the boil for my pasta, and now I'll prep the protein. This here is a piece of pork tenderloin that I pounded out thin, salted, and then rested in the fridge for a couple hours. You can do this with whatever protein you want, but we're going to cook it hot and fast, so just make sure it's thin. In this little ramekin, I'm going to put together my blackening spice mix, which is going to consist of black pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, oregano to give it that through line with the chimichurri, thyme, smoked paprika, and cayenne pepper. I'm not adding any salt to this because, for one, I already salted the pork, but even if I hadn't, I would apply the salt separately just to have that independent control over the final salinity. And here I have about a tablespoon of melted ghee that I'm going to rub onto the pork. I'm using this instead of whole butter because that has milk solids in it that would burn, but to be honest, I don't think that's a huge concern with this style of preparation, so if that's what you have, then I'd say go for it. And then I will very generously dust this with my spice mix. The ghee not only lubricates the meat, but will also help the spices adhere, so you can really go for the gusto. While I wait for my cast iron skillet to preheat over high, my water has come up to a boil, so I'll throw my pasta in. I'm using cavatappi today. I prefer a short shape over a long noodle for this, but use whatever you want. Once my skillet is hot, I'll throw the pork in and give it a gentle press to make sure it gets good contact for even searing. Fair warning, this one might get a little smoky, so you may want to turn on the vent fan or open a window when you do this. I'll give it around 3 minutes on the first side and then flip it, at which point it should look something like that. At this point my pasta is done, so after reserving some of the cooking water, I'll drain this in the sink and set it aside for now. The pork should really only take a couple minutes on each side, and according to my thermometer, this one's done, so it's going to come out of the pan, and I'll put that on my board to rest for a few minutes while I finish my pasta. That's going to go back on the heat now, and I'll add about 1/4 cup of my reserved water for now, and then a couple scoops of my Romesco. I want to thin this out with just enough water to make the texture silky and not gloppy. This part is really not an exact science to me, just go slow and add a little bit of water at a time and then stop when you think it looks good. That looks good to me there, so I'll call it done. To serve, I'll get a couple big scoops of pasta, and then I'll slice my pork up nice and thin and nestle that in there, and then I'll finish with the chimichurri. I like a big swipe down the middle and then a few extra little dots around on the pasta. And that's it. That's the dish. To me, this is a big bowl of summer. It's bright, fresh, tangy, spicy in all the right ways while still being super hearty and filling. When I had the idea for this dish, I was pretty sure it was going to be great, but I wasn't 100% sure. Well, I'm happy to report that it worked fantastically well, and I hope you give it a try sometime. If you do, let me know how it goes. Thanks.